Hello, so we're looking inside the engine bay of my convertible EXP because it's the tranny I have the most access to at the moment. Um, if any of you own a Contour, this will look familiar. This is the flex plate um, that goes between the transmission and the engine of a V6 Contour and a MTX 75 or whatever the automatic equivalent is. It's the same plate, same bolt pattern. But this pattern you see here is unique to the V6 engines. It will only mate to the 2.5 Duratec V6 and the 3.0 Duratec V6. No other Duratec V6s or Cyclones, however you'd like to call them, and definitely not the Vulcan, not the old SHO. The V8 SHO shares this pattern. The new SHOs don't. None of the 4-banger Duratec share this pattern. None of the CVHs share this pattern, and none of the Z-Techs share this pattern. This is unique only to the 2.5 and 3 liter V6 Duratecs and the V8 SHO. But how often will you come across one of them? Okay, but well, I want to show you why, because I get asked all the time from Contour owners, Taurus owners, and Escort owners, and Tempo owners alike. Can you bolt up your Duratec V6 to the older style MTX? This would be the MTX that mates to the V6 SHOs, all the CVHs, all the Z-Techs, the 2.3 Lima. That's the overhead valve, not the overhead cam. But they do share the same bolt pattern. And then the 3 liter Vulcan. They all share this pattern, more or less. Enough that you can bolt them all up without much issue. This, however, is very special, and we'll see why. We'll put it on here. You put it on the way so that little crescent opening on the left just clears the drive shaft. You put it on there just like that. It mates up with one bolt hole, but literally nothing else does. That's the issue. It's just nothing lines up. Absolutely nothing lines up. You move it over to the right, and you can get it to line up with one of the bolt holes where the starter goes, and maybe that top left one. So you can get that one and that starter bolt. You can get both of them on in the same place. But now you're offset. Your crank will never line up with the input shaft of your trans, which is no good. So it just can't be done. I'm going to show you what the engine looks like over here. So here I got a 2.5 V6 out of a Contour. It's the same thing they have in Cougars, and then the 3 liter is more or less the same engine, just different bore. And you'd find that in a Taurus, and the V8 SHO is comparable. We'll just say comparable. People freak out when I compare or contrast them because they just refuse to believe that they're different, man. There's no way they're the same. Well, they have similarities enough that makes the whole thing questionable. Anyhow, this is the MTX 75 that you'll find with a manual Contour, SVT Contour, manual Cougar. It's all the same transmission. And it's said that this back half, literally just the half of the case that houses only the gears, is the same one that they put in all the, I believe it's 97 to 2002 Escorts and ZX2s. But they cast because there's two halves. Keep in mind, there's two halves. There's the big half here that has all the gears in it, and then there's the left half that has the bell housing on it, and half of the diff casting. But it seems like that the bell housing half of the casting could come off and be interchanged with the bell housing half of a Z-Tech Escort, where a 2-liter CVH Escort. It seems like they can interchange, but I'm not for certain. Going off the pictures I've seen and the rumors I've heard online from forums, that's what it sounds like, but I've never had... Well, one, I've never had this transmission apart, and two, I've never had an Escort newer than 84, to tell you. Because keep in mind, like I said, these only went from 90... Well, in the Contours and Cougars, it went from 95 all the way to 2001, I think, is when the Cougars stopped. But the MTX 75 and the Escorts, they only used it from, like I said, I think it was 97, and then it ended in 2002. But I thought they carried on to the Focus just for a couple of years, like 2004 or 5, when they finally phased out all the Z-Techs. Yeah. Well, and the next question becomes, well, okay, well, what's stopping me from putting the entire Duratec V6 and the tranny comes with inside an Escort or a Tempo? Well, it's because you're quite limited on space. That's the big issue. Okay. With my tranny in there, you can see that this is about where it sits. Once the engine's bolt up and everything, you have about roughly an inch to spare between the inner fender wall and the end of the transmission. On the motor side, you got less than an inch between the engine pulleys and that subframe / fender well assembly. There's very little clearance on either side. And if you know anything about the Contour Cougar, they're significantly wider cars. You can tell just by here that this thing is just a freaking monster. It's crazy deep, or if I turn the camera like this, it's crazy wide. But it's crazy long with the tranny attached. Without the transmission, it's actually a fair-sized engine, like that guy is. It just looks like a normally sized engine, but this transmission is awfully large. I know it sticks out an inch or two longer than the Escort Tempo Taurus transmission. When I say Taurus, I mean pre-Duratec Taurus. And then the V6 engine itself sticks out a few inches beyond the straight 4, or at least my straight 4 is the CVH's, and it's a hell of a lot taller. Right now I have my Duratec sitting just a few inches off the ground, and I have my Z-Tech sitting, or not my Z-Tech, my CVH a couple inches above this, and they're level. So this does sit, I think 2 inches or just over that taller than my CVH's. So if you wanted one of these in an Escort, you'd have to re-engineer all of this. Have to re-engineer everything up against that wall, and then you'd have to cut a hole in your hood. I have a friend in Canada who was able to work a 3-liter Vulcan up inside their LN7. That was a snug fit, but it fits. Like I said, it mates up to the transmission, no problem. Probably had to do some custom motor mounts, because this motor mount is specific to the 82 and 83 EXPs. and 81 Escorts, 81 through 83 Escorts. But he had to cut a hole in the hood, and he covered up that hole with a hood scoop just so the 3-liter Vulcan could clear. And that's not too tall of an engine. I'm willing to bet it's not much taller than the Duratec here. The Duratec, for all I know, is taller than the Vulcan. Sadly, I've never had a Vulcan in my presence to compare, but more or less that's where it leaves us today. I'm sure one of you is thinking, well, why don't you make an adapter plate? Well, the issue with an adapter plate is it's twice the thickness of this. At the minimum, it's 1/4 of an inch thick, so you actually have something for your bolts to grip on. And you know, 1/4 of an inch isn't going to do you any good because your engine can't fit in here anyways. So why bother? But the MTX 75 is not my preferred tranny. I hate it. The hydraulic clutch drives me up a wall. Keep in mind, this is one of the best hydraulic clutch systems out there in all of our contours. The clutch is really nice, but it is not as nice as having cable. There's a lot less feel with this, but it's still a lot more than like a modern Fusion. They're pretty weak. They like to blow out diffs around 300 horsepower or so, everyone says in the SVT contour forums. The engine itself is good for a lot, as long as you can beef up the lower end. They're good for, well, at least 300 horsepower. That there's a contour forum, and someone posted in there that their V6 contour, sorry, not V6 contour, but their 2.5 or 3-liter V6 was pumping out 600 or 700 horsepower, and you had the dyno graph to prove it. Quite impressive. However, no front-wheel drive contour or Cougar tranny will ever hold up to that. I think it's right around 300 or 350. You start blowing your differential into pieces. It will actually split the case back where the differential is, kind of in that area, if you picture these as that tranny. These, however, they're good for a lot of power. I've heard a lot of rumors about what kind of power these can pump out. I'm not going to say because I don't want to be held accountable for it, but keep in mind the MTX out of an SHO can directly replace these, but you will probably need custom mounts and custom axles. But that tranny, for anyone who's seen the Blue Turd, knows that trannies get up to 1,000 horsepower and then some. So if you can find yourself an MTX out of a Taurus SHO MTX, you can do almost anything. But those guys are pretty weak. I've seen guys put Miata transmissions behind the V6 Duratec, and those seem to take a lot of abuse. But these front wheel drive MTX 75s and whatever the automatic equivalent is, they're weak as glass. You'll hear weight racers say that they have no problem with theirs. So maybe it's luck of the draw, but it's just definitely not to my liking. But the video's long enough, so we'll stop now. Quit while we're ahead, I suppose.